or an Oak Ridge.
Okay, this is we're sitting on the side of Oak Ridge Road looking across towards Lakeshore, and it looks to be the same field that we see in one of Standard Morse's pictures of his of Tilly Lund's man mowing hay with a one-horse mowing machine. And you can see that the hay is quite thick and heavy. It's probably cut later in the year, later in the first cutting, and you can see a young man, a kid there working with a hay rake, kicking the hay back away from the previous cut. Otherwise, he couldn't get the mowing machine up there to make the next cut. Those big bunches of hay would bob up in the cutter. That's about what we can see there. On the back of the note, maybe it's Mike and the mowing machine. Maybe that's the horse's name. What we're looking at right now, we're looking at the site of the old Mary Tyler Day School, which most of my relatives went to. My grandfather, my father, uncles. Uncle married a school teacher eventually one time. And around 1930, the school had been abandoned for a while, and there were hobos sleeping in it. And it was moved down to the old Joshua Day farm, which was my grandfather's, J.T. Chadwick's farm, which is now the Anvil farm, and it was used in back for either a tractor shed or a bullpen.
Okay, Lakeshore Road in about 800 feet from Main Street. This is the field where Ken has a picture of a horse plowing out carrots. Distant view of the lake.
Okay, we're looking at the site of one of the older pictures that Eddie Cunningham took of my father's corn patch, which was my uncle thought my father done quite a job of getting the roads all that straight with just a horse, and he had Eddie Cunningham take a picture of it when he looked up there and saw it one day. So that's it's right up here now where the black and white cows are, belted Galloways or Oreo cookie cows they call them, and that was the location of where that corn patch was.
Which is across the street from Anvil Farm.
Across from 645,
yeah.
Which is one house up from Anvil Farm.
We are.
Right now we're at the location of the dam for the old grist mill, the Day Grist Mill on Main Street, right on the brook that runs out of Hubby's Pond into Johnson's Pond, and it's in between the current Anvil Farm and the black and white cow farm, or whatever you want to call it. We're looking at rocks that my father put up there to try and control the water. We made a little dam there so we could hold the water back for irrigation. And he would fill this pond where those rock works are up with water from Hubby's Pond and hold it there, and he could irrigate all these lower fields on both sides of the brook for my grandfather's farm and on my father's farm. And originally there was just a solid dirt banking right across there, gravel banking, and the water came over the top in a chute and over the wheel. that was behind the big water wheel that was behind the mill house, where the mill was. And then the wheel hung down in the pit, which was about 15 feet deep. And so I don't know exactly how big the pit was, or the wheel was, but it was a good large wheel. And that's how they got the power to run the stone, to turn the grist mill. And one of the stones is still there, leaned up against the wall on the other side of where we are now. Oh yeah, that back, you can see the original gable end of the house up there. And that window that's there was my bedroom window. There was a window beside it, but they built out over the top of the old kitchen and put that dormer on, that big other top of the house on. So you could hear it there in the springtime. Frogs peeping away, brook running.
Okay, so you're saying the grist mill was right here up in the
building itself sat right there. Yep. And the wheel hung out. The wheel was on the back side of the house, and down where those weeds are, there's a deep pit there that's half filled in with rocks that we pick rocks up off the garden every year, and we dump the rocks in it to fill it up.
They grow like potatoes, don't they?
The rocks?
Yeah.
Yeah, they keep growing.
Okay, so that's looking down into the pit.
Okay.
Right here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, there's the wheel.
And if you jack it up, you can see the stone.
I see it.
The upper stone. And if you look sharp, you can see the stone has an iron band around it. Okay.
So you said the band on the...
There's a big iron band there put around the stone because my grandfather told me when they were making that stone, it cracked. And they didn't want to lose all their effort they put into it, so they shrunk a big iron band around it to hold it together.
And how many years was that successful for?
Oh, it ran until it ran probably till around the early 1900s, because it was all gone the building was all gone by 1930, and there was just some junk. My uncle, I think, had hauled all the machinery off for junk. But I don't know when it was built, probably around right after 1850.
So it got a good 50 plus year run.
Yeah.
So did they grind corn and wheat?
And also they said one time they put in box making machinery. And they just used the water power to run the mill with, to run that with.
Okay, so we're on. So we're looking at
Now this view of the farm from 645 Main Street to what used to be the J.T. Chadwick farm is now the Priscilla farm. And this back field is about 50 acres on this side of the road that goes with that. Well, that did go with that farm. It was tillable. Corn, a lot of corn was grown there, and squash.
It looks like they got corn growing now.
Yes, there is. Right now they got this lower half as a hayfield. But all this land could be irrigated from this brook when the water was held back.
And if you listen closely, you'll hear it. Okay, you're on.
As far as I can tell, this is the remains of the Mary Tyler Day School which was moved here around 1931, and it had put a couple of big doors in the sides, and they used it to store the tractor in and another piece of machinery. There was 2 double doors. Since they've been filled in and narrowed down to just a walk-in door. But as far as I can tell, that's what this building was. I knew that the schoolhouse came here in 1931, and the only other building beside it was a bullpen, which was entirely different. A big heavy pen was all built out of planks to keep the bull in. And so this is probably the last, and I think it was also the number 5 school. I think that's what the number was, but it was also called the Mary Tyler Day School. My grandfather went to the school in around 1880, 1870, 1880. Yeah, he was born 1870. He went to this school. And my father and my uncles went here, and aunts. It used to be up at the corner of Lakeshore and Maine. And I think we've taken a picture of that lot a little while ago to show you what it looks like today. But it was long. That was when they had the district schools. One down at West Boxford Center, and one here, and one down around Ipswich Road. So then in around 1900s and 1910, I think they were consolidated. Up around the back of the building, and right here where the car is was the barnyard. And in the winter, we'd let the cows out into this yard. Right on the edge of the driveway was a board fence, and it went down to where the lawn is, and went up to the corner of the building. It was not hot topped or anything; it was just a gravel bottom, and we let the cows out and down into the cow lane, which is behind me, to go to the pasture for the day in the summertime.
So that's the cow lane.
Right by the corn patch down there is where the cow lane was. That went right down the hill, right across to where that dam site was, where the grist mill was. Down a ways, and then back towards the garage. And in there was all the hot bins, 60 sash long between here and the garage. Sash was side by side, about 3 feet wide, about 6 feet long. That's where all the plants were started. The pepper plants were started there, the tomato plants, iceberg lettuce plants were started there, and then transplanted. Tomato plants were started there, and then transplanted after Memorial Day. And this was this on this side where there isn't any corn was an empty pasture that used to be hotbeds back when they were bigger, back when the farm had more people on it. The front of the 4-stall garage down there is about where the hotbeds ended up coming this way, and there was 3 full strings from the garage up to this cow lane. So that would be 60 times 3 to give you the number of sash that we took care of in the wintertime. Had to be all puttied and painted and cleaned up, ready for, it'd be put back up, started probably in February where the seed bed would be planted. And then as they were transplanted, we'd get maybe 15 to 20 sash full of one particular plant or another to transplant. The garage is the same building that's always been there. So it's in the same location. You know, on this side of the driveway, there was a long building that was full of squash in the wintertime, squash house. And there was a long building in 3 sections, the squash house, the tool house, and the carriage house. and that ended right where the hot top ends and the lawn starts. And when Mr. Seller bought the place, he took down a lot of buildings to try and cut down on the tax bills. Other than that, the barn is pretty much the same on the outside. The inside is all changed. The stanchions are all gone. And we used to have 35 milking cows there. The silo is in the same place. But there's still been quite a few changes. Right now you're looking up towards the what probably would have been the end of this long building that contained 3 sections: the squash house, the tool house, and the carriage house. The carriage house had horse sleighs in it, 2 cutter sleighs. The tool house had a market wagon sled for the winter use to go to Haverhill with, and the squash house carried the winter squash, Blue Hubbard squash, through the winter that we would sell in Boston over the winter by the pound. And you can see in the picture of that building that the squash show up right in the windows. Looking across that cellarway there, you can see the door to the root cellar, which is facing us. The door on the right is the door into the manure cellar, which we used to have to haul out manure there 2 or 3 times a year. And that was hot topped in the 60s. It used to just be gravel. The cellars are quite large. They go into the whole barn except for the new cow barn.
Okay, you're on.
Okay, we're standing right in the yard now, looking where the squash house used to be. Right about where that little horse plow is, was about the end of the building, and it went right up to the barn. And it was in 3 sections. The section on this end was a squash house. The walls were all plastered. There was a little stove in it. Kept a little heat on there during the winter. In the middle section of those 3 long doors, there was a tool house that had a lot of cultivator parts and machinery parts, and also a market sled that we used to take. My grandfather used to take to Haverhill in the wintertime. And beyond that was a section that was all one building. The last section was what we call the carriage house, and there were 2 cutters in there. That's a two-horse sleigh. I mean a 2-seater sleigh. And the shafts are all up overhead. The shafts were full sets of bells under the shafts, so it was quite musical. And they were there till my grandfather died. And the next day, my father and my uncle took everything out, all the house-bound equipment, took it out and burned it. We're tired of looking at it. It was in the way. They got about $4 for the iron from the stake irons and the axles and stuff. And my cousin told me that within a month, a guy came around and offered $1,000 for any old equipment they had. But that didn't seem to bother my father any. They were just tired of looking at it.
Okay, Ken, so tell me about sashes. You mentioned sashes when we talked earlier.
Yeah, well, I probably should start with what it was like growing up on the farm and what you would run into for particular jobs or seasons of the year and what you came up with. And so we usually started out the first job, because all the time you've got to realize we're on a cow farm, so you're milking twice a day, and the rest of the time is in the fields, depending on what season it is. So about the first thing we came up to get away from the barn would be around February. We would have to start getting our seed bed ready in the hotbed where we grew all the plants. And to do that, we would have to back up to the fall, because that's when we picked up the oak leaves to insulate the ground with under the hotbed to keep the heat in. Down off of Lakeshore Road, there's a road that runs down into Johnson's Pond, and there was quite a heavy grove of red oak trees. And we would drive down in there and with a truck and rake up leaves and get a whole big truckload of leaves. Then we would put them in the bed that would insulate the bottom. This was done in the fall. So with that all being done and had some dirt in place, in February we would uncover they were covered over with boards or shutters to keep the snow off them and keep the frost out of the ground. And we would open them up and rake them around and get some dirt in there, and then we'd dig down a little bit, and we would bring in the hot horse manure that we had been collecting in the fall and winter we kept the horse manure separate from the cows, and pile it up out in back of that 4-stall garage, which you see right in the picture at the end of the hut where we kept the hotbeds. And about once a week, or maybe twice, we would go out and turn it over. We would take the pile and just dig into the pile and throw it behind us and make the pile behind us. And that would, by the time you got done, the second time or third time of shoveling it over, after, not in a row, but the third week or so, when you get out of there, your feet were pretty warm, because we had short half-high boots on, but that stuff would get pretty warm. So then we would take back to the actual hotbed itself. We would bring some of that up on a wheelbarrow and put about 6 inches down on top of the dirt, which was right on top of the leaves, and rake that around, smooth it off, and get it just about so. Then we would put in an inch or two of dirt on that, and then we would shovel or rake over some fine manure and put it in, so there was about an inch or so of fine manure. Then we would put the top coat of dirt on, which was now up pretty near to it was 8 or 10 inches below the top of the sash. And that would be all raked over, and then we would this would be one sash wide. The sash are about 3 feet wide, about 6 feet long, and the hotbeds were just 2 planks, 6 feet wide. And the dirt banked up around the outside of them, sash laid right on the top. So we'd take one sash and get all that dirt ready and the manure in there just right, and then we would smooth it off good. There'd be no rocks there or anything, very, very fine, almost sifted loam. And then we would sow that whole stash with probably an ounce or two of let's say tomato seed, and spread the seed right in there so that it was just all sowed with just like sprinkles on an ice cream cone, all sowed with seed. And then we would just sift some light, very half-inch maybe of dirt over that and put the sash on it. You come out the next day and look, that sash would be dripping moisture from the heat in there. because at night we had them covered over with mats and old rugs and stuff, and the shutters if it was going to snow. Then that stuff would be they would be sprouted up within a week and a half, and that would grow, to be 4 inches high maybe, and by that time it was ready to transplant some of those plants into rows and pick them out. So by the time they had grown up, in the 10 days, we would have gone up the hotbed and made about 20 or 30 sash with the manure in them and all the heat and all the dirt and all ready to transplant these little plants into rows, into separate individual holes. So we would just take a bushel box and with a fork carefully go right into that seed bed and pick up a whole fork, a 6-tined manure fork, close-tined fork, and set it right in of those little plants and set it right in the bushel box, and then lug it up to where we were going to start planting. And we had a dibble that was just as long as the wood as the seed bed was wide, as long as the sash was. All the little wooden fingers, all hand carved and all whittled out and nailed onto the stick, and with somebody on each end. There was always a 2-person job, but mostly in a hotbed, one guy on each side of the hotbed, and we would take hold of that and just plunge it down in and fill that whole sash full of holes, and then set that aside, bring your bushel box up, and take a handful of plants and just lean in there, one hand on your elbow on the sash on one side, and lean in as far as you could, one guy on each side, just till they met, and one plant in each hole, and pinch it up and press it down, and you'd have the whole sash planted with little plants, and to drag that sash down over the one you just did and just move up and do the next one until we get them all in. You might have 8,000-10,000 plants there by the time we get done. Those hotbeds were from the garage up to the cow lane. They were 60 sash long on the hotbeds, and we had, at my time, growing up on the farm, we only had about 3 rows of sash. Back further, they had 3 times as much sash there. They had 6 or 7 rows, and besides another batch behind towards the barnyard. So anyway, we would get those planted, and then probably right after Memorial Day or sometime shortly after, when they would be set out in the field. We just dig them up, and we'd have land prepared out there and get them ready. So that's how we started up the sash, all environmentally sound, you might say, with no electricity involved, no heat involved, other than that, just horse manure and old-fashioned ingenuity, I guess. I don't know how long they'd been doing it that way, but forever, far as I knew. So we would be raising, as I remember it, maybe only we would be raising lettuce that way, and peppers and tomatoes, and I'm trying to think what else we raised for vegetables that we started out as seeds and transplanted. Cabbage, I think maybe cabbage also. Some cabbage was planted, I think, direct from seeds. Root crops, of course, weren't done in there. The carrots and turnips and all that stuff, parsnips, were just seeded out in the field. So that's about how we did the sash. So then eventually the hotbeds get pretty well emptied out and gummed up and full of weeds after the plants were all gone and stuff, and we would eventually have to pick up all those sash and get them on a flatbed wagon, a trailer behind tractors and get them into the sash house, which was a long building out in back of the barn that had a wagon shed in one end, and then there was a partition, and there was a sash place where we repaired the sash, painted them, puttied up. We even mixed up our own putty with a flour and a red dye and linseed oil, and made the putty that we puttied them with. And some we would repair if they were broken, if the corners pulled apart or anything needed to be nailed up, we fixed that. If some were needed to be painted every few years, they were painted. Then they were piled up there till this was all done. Sometimes if you had a half hour between jobs, if a load of hay didn't come in, or if you waited for something else, you'd grab a tractor and a trailer and pick up two guys and pick up sash and get them out in back. So that's how we did that. And another big job that showed up during the year, of course, was getting into corn silage. That was a team effort with the people cutting the corn in the field with the corn binder. As early as I remember it, there was a two-horse contraption that they pulled along that cut 2 rows of corn and tied a string around it and made corn shocks. That didn't last, well, it lasted till pretty much I had left there then, but by that time they came out with choppers and they cut it right in the field and blow it into a wagon. But after you got the corn out in the bundles, there would be somebody in the field would be cutting the corn, and then there'd be a truck and a driver and a couple of people that would throw the corn stalks on, bundles of corn on, and driving in back. Silage blowing, filling the silo was another job that was an all hands job, a crew. Several of the work on the farm were done by crews, like the hay, cutting in hay, getting in the squash, getting in the corn. And some jobs were just picking vegetables like that. Sometimes only one kid, sometimes 5 or 6. But some of the jobs were done by a crew, and the silage was one of them. And the cutter would go out in the field and cut it, bundle it, and then load it on a truck. We'd usually have 2 trucks, so there'd be one loading all the time while the other was emptying. And when the full truck get into the back of the barn and up against the blower, up against the silo, one person would be up on the truck and throw the bundles down into the conveyor that took it into the cutter, the blower, and the rest of the people would be up in the silo to tramp it and get it down in there. And that would work until it got full, and even after it was packed, it would still settle quite a bit. And then it would start to make, well, it would almost be like whiskey. It was corn juice running out of there, and it would smell just like alcohol. And it would run out of the silo down the bottom till it got all drained out. So that would last all winter, and was fed into the cows in the mornings, and that helped to get through the winter. And then, of course, with the hay, that's about all they got during the winter. In the spring and fall, you got and summer, you also got fed. They also got fed out bean vines, carrot tops. They get cut off and put in the cellar. Like anything, even cabbage sometimes got fed to them. And although one time we had a kickback on the cabbage, we lost a load of milk that fed too much cabbage, and you could taste it in the milk. And so the milk company, Glennie, sent a load back, which just had to get dumped out, which wasn't very good. That was so much money that you didn't have. So we had to be careful what you did feed them, also. But bean vines never hurt, and the carrot tops. Other than that, the next thing that came up, I guess we went over the squash, did we?
Yes, we did. Yeah. And how heavy was the average squash in pounds?
Oh, they'd go from 15 to 50 pounds.
So who got to catch the 50-pounder? Your dad?
Well, well, there'd be two people. Usually two people from the pickers to the guy that was piling them. So I was usually on that row of catching. Usually my uncle would be cutting, and maybe one of the older hired kids would cut, and they'd throw them in, and then I was usually right next to the pile, catching the last bunch, and then handed on to the pile. My grandfather they would pile it up in the pile. Unloading them was another matter. We had these were farm trucks with the removable sides that were in sections, and all the sections were on, and they were piled up full, and back up against the squash house window, which I probably pointed out in the picture before, and we started loading up in what would you call the attic first, the top layer. Again, my grandfather would be the one that placed the squash in between. They were like shelves, but they were only about 3 feet high. You had to crunch down pretty hard to get in there on your knees, and they would pile up maybe 2 feet high of squash, solid squash piled in there. But anyway, to get the squash up to the top, we'd take the window out by the door and back the truck right up there, and they'd start passing me in. I'd have 1 foot on the back of the truck, and 1 foot on I'd have 1 foot on the window sill, and 1 foot on a shelf, and I'd get the squash that came out of the truck, and I'd have to push them up over my head to the next guy that would be sitting on a shelf, and he'd pick him up and put him over his head up to the top. So I got him to start, and I had the longest lift to push before somebody caught it or picked it up off me. So that gave you good pec muscles.
Boy, by the end of the season, you must have been ripped.
Well, I wasn't fat. I was only one of 2 kids that when I went in the Marine Corps that gained weight in boot camp, and I'd been off the farm several years then even, because I had worked a couple of jobs after I left the farm and went into the Marine Corps. But I wasn't in bad shape, I guess.
So, how many cows did you have, or were on the big farm?
There was probably, we usually milked around 35 cows.
Okay.
And there would be calf pens that had calves in them sometimes, and there'd be a row down on one side. There usually was heifers that may be probably a year old, getting up there, and so there'd be quite a few all told. But I think usually we were milking around 35.
And it was manual for obviously until you got the milking machines.
Oh yeah.
And you said that manually it took you. What,
it would take 2 or 3 guys about 2 hours or more, 2 to 3 hours to milk them all.
And that was once a day or twice a day?
Oh, twice a day,
Yeah.
morning and night, yeah. We milked about, 6 o'clock in the morning, maybe 7.
And that was
Probably-
2 hours each milking, so.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And the first milking, and then we would wheel the milk down in the wheelbarrow down into the milk room and strain it and pour it into jugs, Glenny's jugs, and put it up on a platform. Get up on the platform and pick the cover up to the cooling method with the 2 big vats, 2 big tubs, refrigerated tubs full of water, and pick the 20-quart jugs, 5 gallons, yeah, 20 quarts, and pick them up and set them down into the water. And there might be 15 jugs from one milking, and then you'd have 15 jugs in the morning, and then the 9, 10 o'clock, the truck would come from Glenny's, and he'd pick up the jugs, put them on his truck, and leave you empties to replace them with. And he'd just throw a old quilt over the milk, try and keep it cool till they get back to the plant. They only had a very low-sided truck, but it wasn't any longer than a long wheelbase platform truck. So I don't know how many jugs they could get in there, but I don't know, he probably couldn't have picked up more than 3 farms before he'd have to go back to the 3 or 4 farms before he'd have to go back to the plant to dump them out.
And where was the plant located? Do you
North
know?
Andover, right up on Mass Avenue, North Andover.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and I just found out the other day went to my 70th high school reunion, and
God love you.
and one of the girls there worked at the Glenny plant. She was related to the whole family worked there, and she told me that the original Glenny farm was Smolleck's. That's where Glenny started.
Oh, wow.
Glenny raised his own milk and peddled it, and then he got so that he thought he wanted to get into the manufacturing the milk more, so he got rid of the farm, and he just started the big dairy, and eventually, of course, the big ice cream business. It was a tremendous big stand up on the highway in Lawrence. So that's where Glenny really started, was right there at Smolleck's.
Which is now an apple farm.
And
Amongst other things.
vegetables, yeah, fruit,
Yeah.
But they do have a lot of vegetables. Yeah.
So how did the milking machines impact
Well, you could take one guy, because you had to wash the udders off, and you had a stainless steel jug with attachments on it that you plug onto the cows, and you could keep you could be milking 3 machines. You could milk 3 cows. We had 3 machines, and it was run by vacuum and electricity that was piped along the top of the stanchion. So you'd plug that in, hook it onto the cows, and then you'd go along, hook it out. You could have 3 machines going at once. So you're milking 3 cows at a time, one guy, and then you would usually have to go along and strip them out, make sure that they were completely dry of milk. So 2 guys could milk in an hour, could do all the milking probably in an hour. So that cut it down pretty good. Because you'd have to clean up the milking machines. You'd have to wash them out. That was added from what you would have done before. All you had was a bucket before to milk into, a milking pail. But you had the machines, you had to clean them out, and you had to dip them in disinfectant and run them through the process and keep it, because everything was even then was pretty well regulated. They would come out and check the cows. Often they checked them for TB, they checked them, which I guess used to be a big deal about spreading TB with milk.
Well, that's why they got into pasteurization.
Yeah. Because I grew up on raw milk, drank it till I was 20, and I couldn't stand the other stuff. It'd make you sick coming out of a bottle. Tasted funny. But eventually, the time I got done going to school and going to service, I don't know when the last time I had a drink of raw milk was, but I probably wouldn't like it now.
You obviously had lots of farms in the area.
Yeah, there was our farm down in the flatland around the pond, my grandfather's farm, and Pearl's farm was up on the hill, and they were on the other side of the pond. That was the two biggest ones right in that area. Up the road where the Far Corners Golf Course was my uncle's farm. He had a big cow barn there.
Is that the red cow barn that's still there, or somebody made into a house? Or about
Far Corners?
Yeah, but about two houses, or maybe the last house before Far Corners? Or?
No, that was the Far Corners was right where the big garage, the big barn is, where they keep all the machines. The barn has been taken down. That was a big barn.
Okay.
From the top of that barn, you could see the ocean. There was the cupola up there. And let's see, the next farm would be, Gemmels had a farm. There was a lot of small farms, and a lot of people had 2 or 3 cows in Boxford.
And that was mostly just for their own use?
Yeah, well, Greenler's peddled milk. Greenler's had a farm on Highland Road. They bottled and peddled raw milk and bottled it. And let's see, I don't know if Campbell's had cows or not, probably, but that's all that I could think of in West that had that any amount of cows. Well, my uncle across the way, he had Glennie would pick milk up from him, Carver, Hibbs. He had a few cows, enough to sell milk. I don't know how many, but he had I know Glennie stopped there and picked up. So that was right handy to ours. So there was a lot of milk coming out of town then.
When did farming start to really decline in Boxford? Can you think of any? I mean, was it the war that made it difficult, or?
Well, going from what I remember, my grandfather died, let's see, in 1954, and they ran my father and my other uncle. My one uncle had split off by then and gone to his own farm. He had his own farm, and so that left the farm with my father and my uncle, and they kept it until 1964, I think. And then they finally sold the cows, and then they sold the farm. And the Pearls farm, they closed down. I think within a 10-year period, I would think that the Pearls farm, my grandfather's farm, my Uncle John's farm, all got sold for somewhere around $30,000 a piece.
Wow.
With hundreds of acres of land. Now they're pulling down $1 million homes, buying $1 million houses, and pulling them down just to get the land that it's on, and build a $3 million house on it.
Yep.
We owned for my grandfather's farm consisted of both sides of the field, right where Mitchell's Pond, Hubby's Pond is and where Amble's big farm is today, that's the same farm. But he had about 50 acres there on each side of the road that belonged to the farm. If you went up over Spring Hill and through the Pine Woods to where the power line now crosses Main Street, Silver Mine Road, that land was connected, and that went all the way through to Washington Street that the farm owned. A lot of woods land. And we had a place in back called the Prairie with about 10 acres where we used to raise squash or corn. And the hillside of that came down to Main Street, right on that sharp curve by Belvedere Road. That was a big Macintosh apple orchard. That was all apple trees. So that was another job that used to have to pick apples and store them up for the winter. On the back side of that hill, there was mostly hay, but I do remember squash there a couple of times on the hill part. But on the flat part, that was usually squash or hay.
Are you still down by Belvedere Road, or are you?
Right across that hill, right across the end of Belvedere Road, up over that hill and down the other side.
By where the fire station is? Or the opposite side of the fire station?
Right across from the field.
Okay.
Right where Silver Mine Road runs right through it.
Okay.
Going out on towards Washington Street.
Gotcha. Okay, we'll throw a map up on that for folks so they can see what we're talking about.
There was quite a bit of acreage there. And let's see, we covered over the jobs that took carrots. We didn't get into the carrots. There was pictures there of my father plowing out carrots and my uncle starting them up, and those would be, depending how wet the ground was, sometimes we couldn't get out there. We had to do it with a horse and a tip cart. But if it got muddy late in the year and it got rainy, you'd get stuck there. So anyway, we'd get the carrots.
When would you start harvesting carrots? November, that late?
No, it'd probably be October.
Okay.
Probably October or early November, yeah.
Okay.
Plow them out, probably in October or some, and get them down into the root cellar and get them thrown off onto the floor, and then we'd cut the tops off and throw them in a pile, and throw the tops in a pile, and lug them up and feed them to the cows within a day or two. The carrots would be kind of dried out, and along the side walls of the root cellar were bins that we'd fill with carrots and cover them over with what we call building paper. And in the wintertime, we go down there and we'd have orders for carrots, so we'd take them into Boston to sell by the truckload. We had a machine there, a revolving perforated drum washing machine. You'd fill that up with maybe 20 bushel of carrots and start it up and turn the water on, and the water would come out the center axle, and as the drum rolled around, they would wash. Would also peel them up and shine them up nice so they're all nice and shiny carrots. And then we'd pack them in boxes, put them on the truck, and either take them to the Haverhill or to the Boston market, or to a customer that ordered direct from Boston or something. Take maybe 50, 60 bushel at a time.
So how did you get in the Boston market? Did you drive in with your truck, or did you take the railway in?
All truck.
All truck, okay.
I know when I was there, I never went to what they called the old market, which was at night in Faneuil Hall. That was done around midnight to 2 in the morning. We went to the Cambridge market, which opened at 6 o'clock at night. And it's right now near Fresh Pond. And when I went through there, when I was going through there was a Pyrofax gas plant there that was all white stuff. And that was apparently an early form of bottled gas, Pyrofax gas. It was like a propane or something.
Mm-hmm.
But right there, Fresh Pond Grill and Fresh Pond on that road, that big highway that went along there, out towards the hospital, there was like a great big parking lot. And I think the back end of it had train tracks run through it. But that would be lined up with trucks, backs facing each other, people walking up through the middle, buyers coming out of the stores, and they'd walk up, down, see what they wanted, and buy it. And you'd also tell them what you had coming up, so they'd know what you were going to bring in later.
And there was no Route 128 back in
Oh
those
no,
days.
nothing like that.
How did you get there?
Well, we went all different ways. We went down through. We would go out 28. We go out the bypass, the new bypass road, by where the college is now. That was still a farm there then.
What college? Salem State? No.
No. The Catholic college there.
Oh, Merrimack?
Merrimack College,
Okay.
yeah. Wilson's Corner. And that cement road that separated, that went from Wilson's Corner to the corner just above it, it wasn't very old then. It had just been built, I think. That little section of 114. But anyway, we went up that, and then we went down what we called the bypass road. It came out at Howard Johnson's, right there on 28 coming out of Andover. That's where that road came together.
Okay.
And then we go down 28. We'd go down through
North Reading,
Reading, and
into Wakefield maybe, or
Stoneham, beyond where 128 crosses now, and
they eventually find your way to
at
Medford.
28 we would turn off in Stoneham on Marble Street.
Okay.
And go down, and eventually you'd come out near a golf course, and went along through there and through Winchester, right across a big bunch of train tracks in Winchester, up along the top of a higher ground there, and then eventually you'd come out, I believe, on the Mass Avenue in Arlington. And
Mm-hmm.
we'd take a left a little bit ways there, and then a right on another road that went up to this gas plant, and I think that was involved. I think that was part of Route 2, and came down through there and right into the Fresh Pond Marketplace. So that's how we got there.
And the Fresh Pond Marketplace, was that like where Route 2 intersected with Fresh Pond, or was that down further?
No, it was. It was right handy to. I think that's Route 2 that went along there
Yeah.
to that Saint something hospital out there, and that was right fairly close to that. But it was just run by the Boston Market Gardeners Association that must have rented that or owned that place or whatever. That's because that's where the trucks all gathered for their market. Now it's all 2-story condos or 20-story condos. The last time I was down through there, no sign at all of the old Pyrofax gas plant. That must have been a hazardous place. I don't know what that. There were just piles and piles of that milky, white, chalky stuff that was piled up there. That must have been the results of how they made that Pyrofax gas.
Oh, the residue.
Yeah.
So to get to the market, we're talking 2 hours?
No, we would usually late getting there, trying to get a load up. We would have maybe an average load in the middle of the summer. You might have the truck was 4 bushels wide, so you have about 8 rows long. Rows of whatever it was. You might have You might have a tier of bushels of corn. You might have bushels of tomatoes. You'd have bushels of beans. We'd have maybe 50, 60 bushels on a load, or sometimes less, depending on what was coming in. And now they're selling, what are they selling now? 75 cents an ear for corn. That was, and as always, we always pack corn in bushels, 5 dozen in a bushel. So that would give you how much money?
5 dozen, 60 times 75 cents.
Yeah.
That's about 45 bucks.
Yeah.
45 bucks, roughly.
If we got $5 a bushel, we were pretty happy.
Yeah.
And we didn't get, if we got $5 a bushel, we didn't get it very long.
But you weren't paying $2.39 for a gallon of gas.
No,
either.
you weren't. It was 5 for $1. 5 gallons for $1. And let's see, we would try to leave the farm by 5 o'clock. And we were usually running through the, coming into Redden, there's 2 or 3 churches there, and they all got clocks in them. If we would get there by 20 past 5, we were doing good.
That's actually a pretty good haul.
Yeah, and go up through the old center of North Andover and come out at Wilson's Corner that way. And
You can't do that today in rush hour, can you?
no. And then we'd head down. Then from Reading we'd go down, so we finally get to. And we would haul some stuff in the wintertime. We would haul in. We never went to the marketplace, but we would haul in direct to some of the biggest stores like Big Bear or some of the big stores in Arlington and Cambridge. We would haul in like a whole load of carrots or something like that. Or Blue Hubbard squash, a lot of squash. We'd take the squash. We had down in the squash house, right as you go in, there was a little clearer spot where the stove was, and there was a regular old platform scale there that would weigh 500 pounds, and we had a little wooden bin built, would hold maybe 15 or 20 squash, and we'd put the wooden bin on, and then we'd zero it out with the balance arm so that it read, and we'd put on so that it balanced out 0 and was just floating. Then we would put on 500 pounds of weights and fill it with squash until it floated again. That means you had 500 pounds of squash on the scale. So that's how we took care of it when we sold the squash, so much a pound, 2, 3 cents a pound, something like that. But it was that would last right into the spring. You'd still have, you get some years they'd rot faster than others. Some years you'd get they'd keep good. Some years the carrots would keep good. One year the carrots never kept at all. They all rotted right from the start.
And that was just due to how they were grown or the weather leading up to it? Or?
They never found out why.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if it was a parasite or a...
Yeah. So there was always things that were working against you. Seems though nothing worked for you, everything worked against you.
Oh, amazing. Well, it's I'm sure that it's a life that, very few people today really, of the younger generation, really have had any chance to experience.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, and it was, there was a lot of dark days, you might say, but it was interesting to me growing up. It felt, I think I was always looked on as, from the family and whatever, as extra. I was always kind of alone. I had an older sister and a younger sister, and I used to go down, I would walk down to the farm when I was maybe 4 or 5 years old to see what was going on there when I first went. And first time I saw Jack Carver, and he was currying a horse in the horse stable. And who knew I was? I didn't know who he was. But he was a guy that really loved horses. He was a teamster. At one time on the farm, they had as many as 6 teams of horses. And besides all the personal horses, like your own riding horse, or my grandfather would have a driving horse that he hooked up to his wagon or to his sled with. So there was quite a bit of horseflesh around there, way before I came along.
And the teams of horses were obviously to work on the farm.
Oh yeah. You plowed, you cut it.
Yeah.
You plowed with a team, would be with a riding plow, and a two-way riding plow, and then you had a mowing machine, would be a team of horses. The manure spreader was pulled by a team. The hay was pulled by a team of horses. The mowing machine. So if you were doing more than, you obviously couldn't be plowing and cutting hay at the same time with the same team, so you had to have more than one team of horses. But when I grew up, there was one team. They had one team of horses and one single horse that we cultivated with. In between the rows or planted. My father did most of that work. And he'd bring the horse home at night. My father ran his own farm at night and weekends, and we used the single horse, and he'd throw me up on back to ride the horse to steer it between the rows, so he wouldn't have to bother with. He could pay more attention to the cultivating and stuff. But ever since then, I've hated apple trees, because alongside of the edge were apple trees, and he wanted to get close to the edge of the ground, so he'd put his rows right under the apple trees, and I'd have to push the branches through them. And the horse had been touched by an apple branch every now and then, swung by somebody in hand, and every time a branch would break, the horse would jump, figure she was going to get walloped.
And you get knocked off, or?
No, I never got knocked off. The horse ran away one night. My father was putting it, we were way down back where, I think there was a picture on some of those pictures of the cows waiting to come up the cow lane. There was a little pasture there. The cows would come up the cow lane at night, and if we were down back at the house working, I'd go up the cow lane to get to the horse barn instead of going out up on the road. So we got into the cow lane one night, and he was curling up the traces, and I was on top ready to take it up to the thing, and for some reason or other, he gave the horse a little tap with the trace, and the old horse took off and didn't stop till I get into the barn. And the horse barn is very low posted. I mean, you could reach up and touch the sills above you, the rafters, and I got thinking of that coming around the barn. I could steer the horse all right. It was galloping. I've never been on the old horse. I thought she was going to die, and she wasn't trotting. She was just galloping, and down through all the driveways and up over the humps and hills and get to the horse. And I get kind of sideways in the saddle and lean down enough so that I get in without getting hit. I got slid off there, and finally, by that time, the horse was pretty gentle. I didn't even have to tie it up or nothing. I could unsaddle it and unharnessed it and put that away. She went into the water trough and was drinking by the time my father got down there, because he thought he was going to be picking me up somewhere.
Yeah, she wanted her own place.
Yeah. But it was, with that big an area and that big a family, like when my grandfather, when we get ready to do squash, well, he would call for help. He'd call the in-laws, the Carvers, the Hebbs, my Uncle Frank over in Ward Hill, They'd all come over and work half a day or a day, something like that. Something that required a big game, you called in. My grandfather would put out the call, and people came running.
And obviously, it was reciprocal in that you would go to their place as well at times, no?
Not very often.
Not very often.
No. No, the mountain, Mohammed came to the mountain, but it never went it never went the other way. But it was, growing up, well, who are you? You'd tell them, oh yeah, you're so-and-so's boy. And you go down to the store and get a can of gas, charge it up. There's no money change hands, just put it on the account. And so it got to be it was like a big ranch. It was like its own community. And in fact, when my uncle died and I cleaned his place out, I came across a lot of books. My grandfather actually ran a store out of the farm. Like people had accounts. Barrel of flour to so-and-so. And then when they'd paid, he'd mark it off paid. He carried a lot of people, carried a lot of the relatives, but eventually they all paid up. But he carried quite a big dry goods place there. I've forgotten now what a lot of it was, but I remember charging Uncle George with a barrel of flour, and some of the stuff was hardware. And some of the stuff was hay for their own cows or something. People had a couple of cows. They had to have hay sometimes. Grain, bags of grain. We got the grain. Grain came in two places. We got the grain from the co-op, Essex County Co-op, which I think my grandfather was one of the founders.
But that's in Topsfield?
That's in Topsfield. Yep. And of course the train track came to Topsfield.
Which is now the rail trail, but goes very close to the co-op.
And we got grain in North Andover, what we called the machine shop station, Davis and Ferber. There was a spur went out there to Davis and Ferber, and that's where we picked up most of our grain. So we'd have a pretty good load coming up out of Middlesex Street, coming onto 125. And then coming down by Lake of Chadwick. But that was, and that you get to work out time you loaded that up and then get it in the van and unloaded it, get it put away. It was, sometimes you get a beet pulp that used to come in big bags. They were hard to handle, but it wasn't that heavy. It was heavy enough, but it wasn't 100 pounds. But you'd have regular, and the Co-op had its own brand of grain, Essex, just an S and an X for short for Essex.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if they still do or not, but they would.
Well, they have their own. I use the Essex County number 5 grass seed for my lawn. I've used it for years.
Yeah.
And it seems to do very well. I have to mow it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if we went back to the sash and the hotbed sash, and in the wintertime, there was a little stove in there, and we'd have the stove going, and maybe in the afternoon, after we got stuff taken care of in the morning, maybe some hay moved around, or milking and everything, but maybe afternoon we'd have a little fire in there, and my father and my grandfather would be out there, and I'd be out there. And some of the younger ones would come out, and we'd have a sash in there on sawhorses, and we'd brush it down and scrape it down and check it all over. If there was any broken glass in it, we'd replace that and peel out all the loose putty, maybe put in some zincs to hold the glass in, and re-putty it up.
And those are like little triangular.
Yes.
The house I grew up in had those puttied windows. And
Yeah.
I can remember my father doing exactly that with the storm windows.
And we made our own mats, a straw mat, we'd let one field of rye straw grow up and not cut it until they got big and tall. Then they'd cut it, and then we dried it and set it aside, and we get it in there in the wintertime. And they had a bench there and a fixture all made where you took a certain handful of rye straw and stuffed it down and there was three or four rows of binder twine that was laid across this fixture, and we put the rye straw down into that fixture, pulled the rope across it, the binder twine across it, put the next hand down, pulled it back across the other way, so when we get done, we had a whole mat, maybe the size of a, well, it was only, they were the length of the hotbed, so they were
Maybe
about
like
6 feet long.
3 by 6 roughly, or maybe a little
Well,
wider.
yeah, they did more than a sash. They did 2 sash at least.
Okay.
And but we put them on for the insulation at night.
So you're saying the binder was like an inch diameter of straw, or?
The mats ended up to be what you'd get between 2 fingers,
Okay.
and so long and bound together with, I think, probably 3 rows of string,
Okay.
top, bottom, and middle. And then there was a place on the end where you cut the end off, so had an all even end on it. And these were rolled up in the daytime. You'd roll them up and stand them up against the fence, the hotbed fence. At nighttime in the winter, when it was early, when the stuff was first set out, sometimes it snowed after stuff was set out.
How early again? Was that February, March, or?
February, I think, when we started, and by the time you got to transplanting stuff, I know we were out there, you'd be out there transplanting stuff sometimes when it was snowing, and we had a little hut built that we could move along, and we'd crawl inside of that and be setting out plants. But at night we would put out the straw mats. Then we would put out, then they had some big long rolls of old rug matting that they got somewheres, and unrolled them down. And if it was real windy or going to snow, we'd put the shutters down on top of that because it was easy to shovel off of a board shutter if we had to shovel them out in the next day. But and then too, going back to when we first set out the seed bed, and you could see the moisture on the glass. I don't think we ever watered the seed beds. It just came natural from getting the moisture off the glass. Would drop down and keep that thing all moisturized. And when the plants get big, and in the summer when we took the sash right off, then we had water out there, and we would have to naturally water them. But for the first month or 2, I think it was just natural condensation coming off the sash that kept them watered.
And probably from the horse manure as well.
Well, yeah, it was the heat.
Yeah.
The heat and the moisture came up out of the ground and condensed and went right back in again.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your experience in farming in Boxford with the residents of Boxford. And, it's a tradition in this town that very few people, I think, are really aware of, that how much farming really meant to Boxford, especially your generation and the generation and 2 before yours.
Yeah. But there wasn't many jobs off the farm as I was growing up, but now and then, well, one guy down the street, he went by the house every day. He worked for the telephone company, and 2 or 3 people, you know who they were. They worked out of town, and that's all there was. Now it's everybody works out of town, and nobody is home. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.